Thank you for coming in such large numbers. We planned for a large room, so you're all very comfortably seated on a very exciting topic that always brings out a lot of reflection, but also emotions. My name is Jacqueline Côté. I'm the Director of Public Relations here at the Institute, and it's my real pleasure to present our speaker today. So Vincent Cheddaille, he is a professor here at the Institute in International Law, and he's been here, I think, 15 years now. He set up and created the Global Migration Center a few years ago, and he is the director of that center. And he is also board members of another center called the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights down by the lake. Vincent is a leading expert on migration, a field where he has published extensively. From my count, there's 16 books and at least 15 articles and reports on the topic. And in that capacity, he's also the editor-in-chief of Refugee Survey Quarterly, and also a general editor of 2 book series on the theory and practice of public international law and Organisation Internationale et Relations Internationales. But also, Vincent launched a law clinic for his students, which gives them the possibility to work on a concrete case relating to migration, and this is relatively new. Vincent is also a frequent commentator on migration issues, and you may have seen some of his articles on Trump's migration decrees and Australian detention centers, among other things. So the title of his address today is Making Migration Great Again, and we don't know where that comes from, and particularly the challenges and opportunities of the UN Global Compact on Migration. So as all of our lunch briefing, we expect to finish on time at 1:30, so as to allow you to go and grab some lunch. Vincent will speak 20 to 30 minutes maximum. How many? 30 minutes, and you will have another 30 minutes to ask him questions. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here for this lunch briefing devoted to the UN Global Compact for Migration. As you know, migration has been higher than ever on the political agenda, whether at the domestic and international level. Migration is everywhere. Migration is more visible than ever. But the visibility of migration in mass media, political discourse, has generated many stereotypes and misunderstandings. And today, there is a huge gap between reality and perception about migration. Anyone has an opinion about migration, but very few really know what migration is in reality. And because of this lack of evidence-based knowledge, migration has been polarized before it has been analyzed. It has been instrumentalized before it has been understood. And given the prevailing misunderstandings surrounding migration, I will start my presentation by 3 very basic restatements. The idea is to dispel 3 common arguments generally raised in any discussions about migration in order to provide a more rational and objective picture of migration. First of all, it is frequently argued that migrants are too numerous. For those who are afraid by an invasion of migrants, I have very good news. Migrants represent a small and very small portion of the world population. This is not 34, this is 3.4%. So the least we can say is that contrary to the message sent by mass media and politicians, migrants are a marginal portion of the population and there is no invasion. In short, migration is not an issue of numbers. There are many other issues, but numbers is not part of the topic. The second argument frequently raised in many discussions about migration is to say that migrants represent a threat to economic development of host countries. And here again, this is simply wrong. Let's look at another official UN source. Migration, as mentioned here, is a source of prosperity and development. Of course, it is well known that remittances sent by migrants in their own countries are very significant, 3 times all official development assistance. But it is equally important to remember that migrants also contribute to the development of host countries. 95% of their earnings is spent in the host state. So, and more generally, all empirical and scientific studies have demonstrated that migrants are not in competition with nationals on the labor market. So clearly, migration is more a source of development than the contrary. The third and last typical misperception surrounding migration relates to the common belief that migration is primarily from developing countries to developed countries. Here again, this is not correct. As mentioned here, south-south migration is more important than south-north migration. Of course, and we have here first south-south migration, then south-north migration, and then north-north migration, to give you a general overview. And this is the most recent data from the last UN report published last year. Of course, there is an increase, as you can see from the graph. But here again, there is an increase of migrants since 1990, but an increase does not mean an invasion. When compared to the world population, in 1990, migrants were 2.9%. So an increase from 2.9 to 3.4% is far to represent the invasion depicted by mass media and politicians. But of course, as highlighted in this graph, migration is a truly global phenomenon that concerns all states in the world from all regions. Migration is a matter of common interest that cannot be managed on a purely unilateral basis. Migration affects, of course, every state, whether as a country of origin, as a country of a destination, or a country of transit. But in reality, most states in the world are the 3 at the same time: destination, origin, and transit. Against this background, migration is an international reality that calls for an international response. And that is why the Global Compact for Migration is so important. The Global Compact for Migration represents a unique opportunity to provide a comprehensive and balanced approach to migration in a spirit of shared responsibility among all stakeholders. And this is the main challenge of the Global Compact. So, what is the Global Compact for Migration? The Global Compact has been initiated by the New York Declaration, adopted in September 2016, and the New York Declaration has launched an ambitious process of negotiations with the view to adopt a global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. And the annex of the New York Declaration provides the following definition of what should be this global compact. The Global Compact will set out a range of principles, commitments, and understandings among member states regarding migration in all its dimensions. It will present a framework for comprehensive international cooperation on migrants and mobility, dealing all aspects humanitarian, developmental, human rights related, and other aspects of migration. So the overall result shall produce a comprehensive but not formally binding framework of cooperation. And of course, the task is both challenging and promising. The objective to adopt this global compact is particularly ambitious also because the time frame, the timeline, is extremely short. Here there are 4 main stages. We started last year with consultations, then stock taking. Intergovernmental negotiations started in February and are supposed to end in July. And then finally, the Global Compact will be adopted at an intergovernmental conference at Morocco in December of this year. So the timeline is very short given the challenges. And of course, skeptical can say that UN member states are supposed to succeed in less than 2 years what they did not achieve in 2 decades. But in reality, the mission to adopt such a global compact this is not necessarily an impossible mission. First of all, because the Global Compact is far to be the very first initiative in this area. In fact, the Global Compact is the culmination of many other initiatives adopted during the last decades to promote international cooperation in the field of migration. You will find here some of the most relevant international initiatives adopted so far. I mean, this list is not exhaustive. There are hundreds of initiatives adopted at the regional and universal levels, but this table highlights some of the most important ones, starting with the Bern Initiative, a state-owned process launched by Switzerland outside the UN and producing the International Agenda for Migration Management. Then the Global Commission on International Migration has been set up here again outside the UN to produce a report with a long list of recommendations in order to improve interstate cooperation on migration. Perhaps more importantly, in 2006, the very first high-level dialogue on migration and development has been organized by the General Assembly. And the main result of these major high-level meetings was the creation of the Global Forum on Migration and Development. Every year, all interested stakeholders, including all states, are used to have a meeting to discuss migration and development. Another important step is the second high-level dialogue on migration and development, organized in 2013, here again within the General Assembly. And interestingly, the General Assembly has produced a declaration adopted unanimously by all UN member states about migration and development. And then the most recent one is, of course, the New York meeting of 2016. So global migration is not new as such, and because there are many other past initiatives. So what is really new in the Global Compact? When compared to the previous initiatives, the Global Compact presents 3 main characteristics alongside the template given by the New York Declaration. First of all, the Global Compact will address migration in a comprehensive way as a topic of international concern. And in fact, this is the very first time that the UN is addressing migration on its own without any connection or interferences with other fields such as development, tourism, climate change, and so on. So here is an important difference. The general philosophy of the Compact is well summarized by the following extract. This extract is from the last draft that has been made public in March. And clearly, this comprehensive approach is the main added value. The Global Compact is a unique opportunity to adopt a comprehensive, albeit non-binding framework that is entirely and exclusively devoted to migration. Despite its non-binding nature, the Global Compact is supposed to list the commitments agreed on by states and to be action-oriented. So this is another added value when compared to previous initiatives. In short, it will identify a set of common objectives, and for each objective, a list of actionable commitments will be set up. So this is particularly important because we need more than ever practical solutions with tangible results. Too frequently, the UN and many other forums have adopted instruments without paying attention to their practical impact in the real world. And that is why the Global Compact can be a major occasion to move from rhetoric to actionable commitment. The third added value, the third characteristic, a follow-up and review process will be established in order to assess the progress in implementing the Global Compact. In particular, the UN General Assembly will organize every 4 years an international review forum to provide a platform for states to discuss and share progress on the implementation of the Global Compact. So these three characteristics represent the main differences, the main added value compared to the previous initiatives. So let's now turn to the content. The content, the current draft, because this is a work in progress, the current draft identifies 22 objectives with a long list of actionable commitments that are detailed in 20 pages. And as you can see, the draft is addressing a broad range of typical issues associated with migration, collecting data, drivers, the driving factors of migration, the fight against smuggling, trafficking, recruitment, social cohesion, non-discrimination, border management, and so on. So this list is quite extensive. This list is also comprehensive and ambitious. But these 22 objectives are not new. They restate and consolidate what has been already agreed on in the past within several other initiatives. And overall, the current draft is interesting and most welcome, but there is clearly a considerable room for progress. And in fact, this is quite normal at this stage because interstate negotiations only started in February. Since February, 3 successive drafts have been produced, and this is the last version. My main concern when you compare the different drafts, my main concern is that draft after draft, the compact is becoming vaguer and vaguer, and its content is increasingly undermined with the risk of producing another paper tiger without any added value when compared to the past, to the previous initiatives. Of course, I mean, the good news is that it is not too late to improve it. The main round of negotiations will take place in July. So there is a room for improvement, and the states have the time to do so. So now I will focus on what is lacking in the current draft, what can or should be improved in the current draft. Of course, I mean, it is impossible to discuss all 22 objectives that are detailed in more than 30 pages. I will focus on 2 main cross-cutting issues. What is lacking, first of all, This is a common vision. The current draft lacks an overall direction, a collective vision. There is no, at this stage, coherent and articulated vision between the 22 objectives. For instance, why collecting data is the very first objective. Of course, collecting data is important, and for academics, this is crucial. But, collecting data is far to be the most pressing issue among the many challenges surrounding migration, such as saving life, or at least ensuring due respect for existing binding rules. So, of course, this lack of vision is, to some extent, quite normal at this stage. It is too early for the state to have a clear-cut vision at this stage of the negotiation process. But this common vision must remain an important target on its own, because without an overall vision, the 22 objectives will become a shopping list. And with such a shopping list, the most obvious risk is that states will pick and choose to retain only some objectives and not others. And this will undermine the whole process, the whole rationale of the Global Compact. The Global Compact is not a menu à la carte. All the objectives must be taken into account and implemented as a whole in accordance with the very purpose of the Global Compact. The purpose of the Global Compact is to provide a comprehensive and integrated approach to migration. So here is, for me at least, the first area where there is room for improvement. The second crucial aspect that is still missing is a balanced approach to migration. This is another key objective of the Global Compact. But draft after draft, the compact seems less balanced than the New York Declaration adopted 2 years ago. A better balance must be established between the different interests at stake among all stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I mean not only the states of destinations and the states of origin. Stakeholders includes the state of transit too, and above all the migrants themselves, who are frequently excluded from most discussions concerning them. If you compare the current draft with the New York Declaration, clearly there is a stronger focus on national security and migration control. To give you a graphic illustration, one paragraph is devoted to border control in the whole New York Declaration, whereas in the current draft of the Global Compact, 11 paragraphs are detailing border control. Likewise, to give you another short example, curiously enough, a new term has appeared quite suddenly in the draft compact. This new term is intelligence service. I don't see really the link with migration, but apparently for states there is. Intelligence service is mentioned 4 times in the draft of the Global Compact, whereas it was not mentioned at all in the New York Declaration. And inversely, references to the human rights of migrants are quite vague, and they frequently lack a specific content. So clearly there is a room for a more comprehensive and more balanced approach. Of course, no one contests that states have the right to control their border. But equally, no one should contest that migrants have rights. Migrants have rights as human beings. They have rights as workers, as victims of trafficking and smuggling, as family members, as nationals of their own country. And more generally, migrants are the main actors of migration. I mean, we cannot forget them if states are interested to create a framework of cooperation. So the rights of the state to control borders must be balanced with the human rights of migrants, and the two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they should work in tandem. The rights of states and migrants are both legitimate and both types of rights are endorsed in international law. And the minimum one shall expect from the UN Compact is to be in accordance with international law. So clearly, this is not necessarily the case on several aspects, if you look at the current draft, and that is why there is a need for improvement. Of course, all the critical remarks I developed so far shall not undermine the many positive aspects of the current draft. One can mention, for instance, the focus on children, the focus on women, the reference to fair recruitment of migrant workers, the reference for pathways for regular migration, among many other positive developments. And of course, the drafting of the Global Compact is a learning process. States still have to learn to cooperate and negotiate, and the Global Compact can make the difference provided that states are willing and able to do so. To conclude, I would like to imagine an hypothetical situation. What if the draft compact was a student paper? And what will be my reaction? Because, I mean, after all, I'm a professor, so this is my job to correct paper seminars. If the draft compact was a student paper in one of my seminars, I would say, this is a good work, a promising starting point, but you can do more and better. And then I will add the following comments in order to improve the draft. My very first comment, this is again a typical comment of professor. What is your thesis? What are you looking for? What is your added value? I mean, this is the basic question for all students, but also academics. What is your purpose, your added value? And I would add, be careful to not forget the broader picture and your overall purpose. The second remark I will do if this draft is a seminar paper, I will say you should be more systematic and comprehensive in your coverage. In particular, this is quite striking and in fact quite disturbing. You missed some binding principles of international law that are curiously not mentioned in the draft, and basic principles, non-refoulement, right to live in any country, the right to private and family life. And do you really think that you can produce a comprehensive approach without mentioning these three basic binding principles? This is an important point from the perspective of international law. I will continue with the two last comments. First of all, you should be more consistent with the sources you are quoting. And why? Because why are you referring to many soft law instruments adopted outside the UN without mentioning UN binding treaties that are quite basic, such as the Convention Against Discrimination and the Migrant Workers Convention? I mean, at this level, for students, this is not acceptable. You cannot focus on soft law standards and forget what is binding. This is the basic. And I will finish, not yet finish, because I mean, I'm used to have quite detailed corrections. So a last but more general remark. You should be more specific in your language and more precise in the term you are using. Style matters. If your objective is to have actionable commitment, they must be identified in clear terms, not in vague terms without any meaning. But of course, I mean, there is a room for improvement, and this will be my last comment. Be positive. Be positive, why? Because you still have 3 months to improve your draft. So, I mean, this is fine. This is fine and this is possible. Second, just to give you a possible idea, start by focusing on what is working. What about best practices? Best practices are mentioned only 7 times in the draft, within 30 pages. I mean, maybe let's start by best practices and then see what will happen. And finally, and this is my last comment, I will say, look at what you have already achieved during the last decade, and please read again the New York Declaration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, you must be a really tough professor. I don't know how many of your students are here, but I don't envy you. Before I give you the word, I actually have 2 little questions. One is, I'm struck by how much of this process seems to happen in New York, when here in Geneva we actually have most of the specialized agencies and of course the entire humanitarian world. So do you think that perhaps we would have gotten a better draft, responding to your points, if more of the discussions had taken place here?
Yes, completely. And interestingly, all the past initiatives have been discussed in Geneva, because Geneva is a place with all international organizations working on migration. And of course, all diplomatic missions are also well specialized in migration, refugee protection. And here is the main challenge, because discussing migration at New York, this is a totally different story. First, because diplomats based in New York are used to discuss about serious business, political business, because the Security Council, the General Assembly, they are talking about use of force, peacekeeping operations, and clearly the professional ethos of diplomats based in New York is more about security than migration. And clearly, this can explain the fact that there are so many obvious mistakes that I'm sure that no student in this room will be able to do. And this explains also, I mean, this strong focus on national security, intelligence service. I think this is more about the professional ethos of decision makers based at New York. Because in Geneva, I guess and hope that the draft will be more specific and more in line with all the previous initiatives.
But as you say, it's not too late.
Yeah.
But flowing on this, the fact that the US, the baby is not yet born, but the US, or at least Mr. Trump, has already said he wouldn't join, does that throw the global compact in some sort of disarray? Or you think business as usual, if they don't want to join, well, that's tough for them?
First of all, to remain polite, I will say that this is regrettable because the US is not only the most powerful state in the world, but also the states where there are more migrants in the world, if you compare to other states. But frankly, to be less diplomatic, I think this is quite good news. Because we can do real business without any extreme politicization, without, I mean, the opportunity without the US is to discuss also seriously about facts and figures. Apparently, this is not yet the case, so we will see. But, I mean, this can be a relatively good news for those who want to produce a solid document based on evidence and knowledge. But of course, I mean, this is a pity and a shame because, I mean, this is a not binding framework. So the US should be part of it in order also to share its views about these, all these elements contained in the draft.
Thank you. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. If you could just introduce yourself and please ask questions and do it shortly so we can give the microphone to many people in a minute. This gentleman and then down here.
Oui, merci. Dario Siprut, je m'excuse de parler en français. Je suis militant à Genève pour la cause des droits politiques des étrangers et on a de la difficulté, j'entends me conformer à votre injonction d'être précis dans les termes, puisqu'on compte les migrants. Qu'est-ce qu'un migrant aujourd'hui, selon cette définition dont vous avez donné les chiffres? Est-ce que c'est toute personne déplacée qui n'est pas présente dans son transitoirement ou définitivement hors de son pays dit d'origine, ou bien est-ce que c'est en relation avec la définition des réfugiés de 1951, des requérants d'asile, etc. Ça, c'est un premier jeu de questions. Le deuxième jeu de questions, c'est est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un agenda à devoir modifier les droits humains tels qu'ils ont été définis en 1948, notamment, du fait qu'on a le droit de quitter son pays, mais on a le droit de séjourner nulle part. Et cette absence de contrepartie dans les droits humains est quelque chose qui m'affecte toujours directement dans cette tentative de donner des droits aux étrangers de citoyenneté. Et j'aimerais savoir quel est votre point de vue sur ce sujet. Merci.
Alors, merci bien pour cette question. La définition de migrant qui est utilisée dans les statistiques que je cite, c'est la définition donc, utilisée par la division statistique de l'ONU. Elle est simple et à mon avis, elle convient bien. C'est toute personne qui franchit une frontière internationale, donc on exclut les personnes déplacées à l'intérieur de leur propre pays, indépendamment des motifs ou des raisons. Et ensuite, la définition statistique distingue la durée. Généralement, les migrants sont ceux qui restent plus d'un an dans un pays étranger. Donc ça n'inclut pas ceux qui restent de façon transitoire et qui font des va-et-vient, comme tous les citoyens de l'Union européenne ici et tous les accords de mobilité et de libre circulation. Donc voilà pour la première question. La seconde, oui, alors c'est ce que beaucoup d'activistes pensent, qu'il y aurait un agenda caché à travers le Global Compact d'atténuer les droits de l'homme. Très franchement, c'est trop tôt pour le dire, on verra bien. Moi, je reste positif et j'espère que les États vont quand même pas aboutir à un texte qui serait contraire aux obligations qu'ils ont acceptées. Donc, à un moment ou à un autre, j'espère et j'imagine qu'ils vont se ressaisir. Mais c'est vrai que depuis le début de ce process, beaucoup d'ONG disent que ce serait un agenda pour affaiblir les droits de l'homme des migrants. Juridiquement parlant, c'est juridiquement pas possible puisque les droits de l'homme des migrants sont contraignants et le Global Compact ne sera formellement pas contraignant. Mais évidemment, en dehors du droit, souvent les discours et la pratique sont davantage influencés par des instruments comme le Global Compact que par des traités. Donc on verra bien, mais d'un point de vue strictement juridique, les droits de l'homme, les migrants ont des droits fondamentaux et les États sont tenus de les respecter. Mon souci, c'est évidemment que le draft actuel est encore très en deçà de ce qu'exige le droit international. Et donc ça, c'est assez préoccupant. Et pour finir sur le droit de quitter, oui, mais alors, bon, le droit de quitter, moi, je reste convaincu qu'il est de nature coutumière. Hein. Il est consacré par plus d'une vingtaine de traités internationaux. Et j'ai fait une recherche sur cette question-là. Et en réalité, tous les États membres de l'ONU ont ratifié un et généralement plusieurs traités sur le droit de quitter. C'est le droit de quitter, finalement, le prérequis au mouvement. Ensuite, évidemment, il ne préjuge pas de l'entrée. Mais, comment dire, le droit à l'entrée n'est pas garanti par les droits de l'homme, mais il est garanti par bien d'autres champs obligatoires. La réunification familiale, le principe de non-refoulement, les accords de libre circulation. Donc, je pense que les droits de l'homme sont relativement neutres sur l'admission, mais exigent que les États respectent le droit de toute personne de quitter tout pays, pas seulement le sien, mais également les pays en transit, c'est important. Toute personne a le droit de quitter tout pays et de retourner dans son pays d'origine. L'entre-deux est régi tout simplement par d'autres domaines du droit. La personne entre comme investisseur, son régime juridique est régi par les traités d'investissement. La personne rentre comme travailleur migrant, c'est un autre régime, etc. Donc je suis, mais alors évidemment, hein, c'est une vision très juridique, inhérente à mon état et mon métier, mais en tout cas, de mon point de vue, il n'y a pas d'incohérence fondamentale entre le droit de quitter et le droit d'entrer.
Just a second. Everybody can ask a question in French or in English, but as for the answers, are some people not understanding French answers? If so, no? Completely bilingual crowd? Okay, fantastic. So, Monsieur Foster.
Jacques Foster, Graduate Institute. Now, if I got you, thank you very much for this presentation. If I got you right, the quality of the successive drafts of the paper has decreased over the years. Now, my question is, what makes you think that the trend will be reversed and that it will improve? I mean, you just mentioned the fact that maybe the fact that the United States may no longer be part of the class, but are there other factors that make you, well, optimistic?
Good question. I mean, this is more a posture than a reality. I prefer to stay optimist simply because, I mean, working in the field of migration, you are, I mean, generally there are so many bad news. Every day there are deaths at sea and so on. So I hope and I believe that states are clever enough to be able to negotiate a declaration that is not contrary to international law. So that is why I'm positive, but we will see. We will see. I mean, I'm also positive also because during the last 2 decades, I witnessed around 100 similar initiatives at the universal regional levels and so on. And at the end, of course, I mean, they are not perfect, but at the end, the result is quite coherent. So that is why I'm still believe that we can produce something serious about with the Global Compact. But frankly, this is just a personal posture than a conviction based on facts, because for the time being, facts highlight that clearly we are in the wrong direction.
Yes, okay, this gentleman, and then in the back, and then we come back down.
Merci, professeur, cher Vincent. Je voudrais savoir, je suis tout à fait... Pardon, je dois me présenter d'abord. François Fouina. J'ai été conseiller spécial représentant spécial du secrétaire général pour l'immigration, Peter Sutherland. Et j'aimerais d'abord dire que tout ce que vous avez dit correspond tout à fait à ce que je comprends et ce que je pense du Global Compact. Maintenant, il y a une question que je voudrais vous demander. Ce Global Compact, ou ce pacte mondial, comme on l'appellerait en français, est, suivant la volonté de l'Assemblée générale, a été déterminé comme étant distinct, séparé et indépendant du pacte mondial sur les réfugiés. Ceci représente, de mon point de vue, sur la base de mon expérience professionnelle et sur la base de ce qu'on voit tous les jours dans les journaux, une faiblesse qui semble absolument fondamentale. Dans le texte de cette première révision du draft, il y a, pour ainsi dire, aucune mention d'une catégorie de migrants que j'appellerais les migrants forcés, qui, que l'on le veuille ou non, représentent un large secteur de la population migrante, et je pense peut-être le plus large. Ceux qui sont dans la situation indéfinie de partir comme réfugiés de chez eux, de devenir des migrants dans les pays de transit et ensuite des demandeurs d'asile quand ils arrivent quelque part où l'asile existe. Donc c'est une faiblesse qui, à mon avis, n'est pas non plus prise en compte par le texte qui est en ce moment présenté comme, enfin, dans le brouillon du HCR qui est en charge du pacte pour les réfugiés. Ceci a une conséquence sur l'architecture, sur la gouvernance internationale des migrations, qui est aussi, en fait, mentionnée dans ce document. Ce qui fait qu'on a deux agences qui sont dans le sein des Nations Unies, une un peu plus que l'autre peut-être, le HCR et l'OIM. Chacune avait, sur la base de cette division du travail, est séparée l'une de l'autre, sans rapport, sans lien pour traiter le problème de la migration. Je voudrais simplement mentionner que Peter Sutherland, qui a été donc le représentant spécial du secrétaire général sur cette question, a laissé malheureusement pas tout à fait terminé à cause de sa maladie et de sa mort, a laissé un rapport. Ce rapport comporte des recommandations. Et je me demande si ces recommandations, qui sont au nombre de 16, ont été, à un moment ou à un autre, pris en compte par les États et par les experts qui ont travaillé sur ces documents. L'une de ces recommandations, si vous me permettez, c'est la dernière chose, consiste à promouvoir pour le bien des gens qui sont des migrants en général, une collaboration étroite entre le HCR et l'OIM, et justement pour traiter de ces cas qui sont indéfinis dans un clan ou dans un autre. Merci.
Oui, merci pour ces questions qui sont effectivement très, très pertinentes. Alors oui, parmi beaucoup d'autres documents, les représentants étatiques ont oublié de lire le dernier rapport de Sutherland de février de l'année dernière, qui est assez complet et tout à fait intéressant et mériterait d'être pris en compte, surtout qu'il évoque ce rapport également, le Global Compact. Donc c'est... les États et l'ONU en général n'ont pas de mémoire institutionnelle, mais toutes les institutions généralement manquent de mémoire institutionnelle. Donc évidemment, c'est pour ça qu'on a l'impression à chaque fois qu'il y a un nouveau momentum. À chaque fois, on a l'impression, ça y est, c'est quelque chose de nouveau. Non, c'est pas nouveau. Ça fait 20 ans qu'on discute des mêmes choses. Et à un moment ou à un autre, ce serait bien d'aboutir. Donc là, mon souci, c'est que ça fait 20 ans qu'on a pas mal d'initiatives à l'intérieur et en dehors de l'ONU. Les États, maintenant, ont plus d'excuses. Ils sont habitués à négocier sur la migration. Donc ce serait bien qu'on arrive à un résultat qui soit décent et en tout cas qui ne soit pas en deçà du passé et des règles contraignantes. Et le vrai souci, ils sont évidemment passés à côté en ghettoisant les migrants et les réfugiés. Mais il n'est pas nécessaire d'être un adepte de Foucault pour savoir que les catégories sont faites pour exclure aussi. Donc évidemment, la définition à somme toute protectrice, mais qui correspond plus tellement aux enjeux d'aujourd'hui du réfugié, mais au banc de la protection, beaucoup de catégories, comme vous le mentionnez, et beaucoup de migrants forcés. Mais là, évidemment, c'est une erreur sémantique, factuelle, méthodologique, mais qui est très probablement volontaire. Très probablement volontaire. Et c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui encore, les gens sont persuadés qu'il y a deux mondes, les migrants et les réfugiés. Non, c'est pas comme ça que le monde existe. Le réfugié est une personne qui fuit la guerre et la persécution, et il se trouve que les États ont limité leurs règles aux réfugiés pour exclure les travailleurs migrants. Donc ce projet d'exclusion date déjà du lendemain de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Donc évidemment qu'il faut avoir un regard plus critique par rapport à ces catégories qui sont certes importantes, puisqu'évidemment on est tenu de protéger les victimes de l'oppression, mais ça ne veut pas dire, comme le dit, moi j'ai été sidéré de voir dans le draft au tout début, qui disent, alors bon c'était la version anglaise, contrairement aux réfugiés, les migrants ne sont pas vulnérables. Et c'est marqué textuellement dans le 3e paragraphe, mais enfin, à un moment ou à un autre, il faut juste être sérieux et peut-être... alors, je ne sais pas qui a écrit cette phrase, mais
Je veux bien qu'il y ait un agenda de distinguer politique, et je respecte parce que voilà, le monde est ainsi fait, qui distingue les migrants des réfugiés, même si toutes les études démontrent que ça ne fonctionne pas en pratique parce que vous quittez votre pays pour différentes raisons. Et voilà. Mais d'un autre côté, de là à distinguer réfugiés, migrants, pourquoi pas, encore une fois, c'est regrettable, mais bon, mais de là à dire que les migrants ne sont pas vulnérables contrairement aux réfugiés, c'est tout simplement pas sérieux. Et là, encore une fois, si un étudiant m'écrit ça, j'hésite à continuer de lire la copie, hein, très franchement, parce qu'à un moment ou à un autre, il faut juste connaître son sujet. C'est tout simplement pas possible. Donc oui, je suis tout à fait d'accord. Maintenant, il faut aussi vivre avec ce qu'on a, c'est-à-dire que les États sont convaincus que le réfugié est différent du migrant. Donc c'est regrettable, mais bon, à ce stade du processus, essayons déjà d'arriver à produire quelque chose qui soit cohérent, et on verra. Mais c'est vrai qu'il y a un vrai souci. Et il y a un vrai souci aussi au niveau de la gouvernance mondiale, puisque... le fait d'avoir deux agences onusiennes qui traitent de deux thématiques est problématique. Le Global Migration Group a été créé par Kofi Annan en 2006 pour améliorer, mais il y a encore beaucoup de travail à faire pour que le Global Migration Group, qui est donc une instance de coopération interagences, arrive. Il nous faut une équipe forte entre l'OIM et le HCR. Il nous faut une vraie coordination parce qu'autrement, on n'avance pas.
We have 5 more minutes to go, and I have 3 people who raised their hands. So if you don't mind, we'll take 3 questions. Yeah? Okay, the gentleman, can you keep it really short, please? 1 question, not 2 or 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Enrico Foss. I'm with the Philippine Mission, and I'm part of the Philippine delegation to the negotiations. I like the way you presented the Global Compact and what is lacking. But in the interest of time, just note that even though the negotiations in New York, the interest that is being played in New York are the interest of the individual countries that are participating in the negotiations. So even if they are diplomats from New York or diplomats from Geneva or experts from New York or experts from Geneva, they will be saying the same thing at a different tone, maybe, or a different way. That's one point. The second point is that I think I would like to take this opportunity that there are a lot of people here that are coming from different countries because one of the main problems that we are encountering in the negotiations is that there is a differentiation between the entitlements of migrants in regular and irregular situation. While all migrants are recognized to have rights, have human rights, are subject to human rights and everything. But when states talk, they talk about a different kind of people when one is in a regular situation, when one is in a regular situation. My call, and I think I like the idea that you have pointed out there are hard laws that should be mentioned, like the Migrant Workers Convention, ILO 189. The New York Declaration was stated as the main document that should not be, that the GCM should not be, or the Global Compact of Migration should not be less than what has been achieved in the New York Declaration. But since this is a reality, that this is a negotiation and compromises will be made, I would like to take this opportunity to invite all of you coming from different countries to convince your government to put on a position that is based on human rights, regardless of the immigration status of the migrant in your country. Thank you.
Thank you. This gentleman here. And then over there.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, for a very interesting and clear presentation. My question is about the political will to implement whatever draft, whatever is adopted. My personal view is that no compact is better than a bad compact, badly drafted compact. Because I say this because I wonder how sincere major destination countries negotiate in this compact. Of course, US is already out, but I will take the case of the UK. What they are doing at present are all against the basic principles of the compact, whatever it is there now, even now, take for instance, this Windrush scandal. people who have lived as citizens for 50 years, they are denied rights because of some lack of some documentation. They are deported. And, there's a arbitrary migration target. So and this environment at the present is not very conducive to, really getting out a good draft. And second point is
Could you just stick to your questions, please, because we
yeah,
really
the
have
question,
to finish.
it is related to that
Thank you.
implementation. What they propose, this converting the high-level dialogue mechanism into a international migration review forum, again, I don't think it is really going to be very effective. I want to know your views on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And then the last question here. If you could keep it short, thanks.
I would like to congratulate Vincent not only on his presentation, but also on the title of his presentation. I think you really brought in a vision. You didn't talk about your own vision. You didn't talk too much about your own vision, but there's your vision. And I want to congratulate you on that. My question is very specific. And that's the role of the EU as European Union and as member states. Because you mentioned best practice. To what extent the practice of the EU is relevant for the discussion of the compact? And I would like just to mention one point, a well-known contradiction in the EU situation. There's a tendency and call of a common policy when it comes to the conditions of migration, whereas the key issue of the number of migrants remains at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will address rapidly the 3 points that are important. First of all, of course, the distinction between regular and irregular migration is important. But of course, the starting point is that migrants are human beings. I'm sorry to be so basic. And they are entitled to the full panoply of all rights listed in the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and others. If you look at the ICCPR, just to give you an example, the Covenant on Political and Civil Rights, that is ratified by 169 states. So, it is well accepted and binding for most states. Almost all rights are applicable to everyone, including migrants. There are only the right to vote and to be elected, that is limited to nationals for obvious reasons. And this is and there is another provision specific for migrants regarding due process guarantees for removal. So clearly, the starting point of international law is that migrants are entitled to all human rights. This does not mean that undocumented migrants have more rights than others. They have the same rights than any of us as a human being. And those who are documented have some additional rights, generally the right to family reunification, for instance, because the right to family reunification is limited to documented migrants and so on. So clearly, this is important to restate this. This is mentioned in a very strange way in the draft, the fact that migrants have rights without regard to their documentation. This is not very, the wording is not clear compared to the very first draft and all the others. So clearly, it is important simply to restate to state that migrants are human beings and they have rights like anyone. Regarding the review process, I will be more or less negative than you about the General Assembly establishing a review process. I think that, of course, the review process done by the General Assembly will be led by states, and this is well known that supervision by peers is not the best way to supervise. We can say the same for the publications in well-known journals in the academic world. This idea that a peer will review your work is not the best way and the most objective way to. But in event, I mean, I think that peer review process plus external review are mutually reinforcing. So there is no one single answer. I think that what is interesting with the review forum in the General Assembly is to create an habit of discussions, exchanges between states. And states, I mean, they have to learn manifestly. So the General Assembly can be also a learning process for states to create an habit of discussions, exchange of views. Of course, this is not the final answer regarding implementation of the Global Compact, because clearly peer review process shall work in tandem with more external independent process. But I mean, this is probably too much for states at this stage to ask for an external review. So we'll see later. But the fact that states will be able to produce a Global Compact and to have a review process, even if this is a purely intergovernmental review process, is a very good idea on its own. This is not, of course, the final answer. But this is better than nothing, and the states have to learn to create exchanges about migration and to share best practices and so on. Regarding the last comments about the EU, well, the EU is not well placed to share best practices in this area, frankly. So, I mean, the EU has more to learn from the world than the reverse in the field of migration and refugee protection. So I'm quite skeptical. Of course, there are major actors, but I mean, the so-called refugee crisis, I'm used to say to all my students here, the refugee crisis is just a rhetorical endeavor. I mean, the cause of the refugee crisis is structural. This is the structural shortcomings of the Dublin regulation and the common European asylum system. I mean, this is easy to solve the issue. 2 weeks ago, Greece, Italy, and other states have produced a common position to reform Dublin. And clearly, if the EU reforms seriously the Dublin regulation, then the EU will be able to give lessons. But for the time being, clearly, this is not necessarily the most influential source for establishing best practices. But I think that best practices, I mean, no state can give lessons in this area, clearly. I mean, there is no, of course, there is a typical divide between North and South, but in reality, no state is able to give lessons to others. I mean, they have to learn, all of them, both countries of origin, transit, and destinations. And clearly, there are many best practices at the domestic and local levels. And for instance, I mean, there are several forums of cities, local actors, and clearly this could be, rather than asking for the EU what the UN can do, maybe a good starting point will be also to compile best practices from the ground, from practitioners, from cities and local actors, and maybe it will make the difference. But again, I mean, we shall not be too. We are talking about states and high politics, so at some point, I mean, it's easy to find best practices. What is lacking is the political will to find and to implement them. So clearly, I am used to say that we should not be too demanding for states, clearly, because I do not expect so much from states in this area. What I expect is simply that they're able to have an agreement of a basic text that can then structure the international discourse and the effective practice on the ground. And if the result is in this direction, it would be great. But states are not the only, they are not all responsible for the situations, and states are only one type of actors among many other actors, including migrants themselves, but also private sectors, civil society, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we have. We'll follow the evolution of this draft, and maybe some of you wants to send this to New York as some idea of how to make it even better draft. So thank you and enjoy your afternoon.